Former President Jimmy Carter has a long-standing reputation as the most ineffective foreign policy of any modern presidency, until now, for many, but we're not going to get into the until now business. Nonetheless, Jimmy Carter and former President of Ireland, a woman by the name of Mary Robinson, have written an op-ed in Foreign Policy magazine. And what they're doing is they want the United States to recognize Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, to the exclusion of Israel, which has been our ally for decades. So Jimmy Carter says we've got to recognize the terrorists.
Yeah, and let's read an excerpt for our viewers from this. It says, the United States and EU should recognize that Hamas is not just a military, but also a political force. Hamas cannot be wished away, nor will it cooperate in its own demise. Only by recognizing its legitimacy as a political actor, one that represents a substantial portion of the Palestinian people, can the West begin to provide the right incentives for Hamas to lay down its weapons. So, Peter, I mean, legitimizing Hamas, a terrorist organization, is this just going to embolden them and embolden all of our other adversaries?
Well, obviously, and absolutely. And I think, yes, that you make a good point in asking that question. The legitimacy of a terrorist organization is always in question. And so for a former president to say it needs to be legitimized as a political actor in the world, along with other states, that's a huge issue, especially when we heard Sean Hannity talking earlier today about 10,000 missiles being hurled into Israel over this 10-year period in this area that he was in. And now a president saying, oh, no, let's recognize Hamas, recognized by the U.S. as a terrorist organization.
Sure. So Charles Krauthammer was on the channel last night trying to explain why some clueless Americans feel that way about Hamas. Here he is with Bill O'Reilly.
I would draw a sharp distinction between the European sympathizers and demonstrators and the American ones. When it comes to Europe, I think the overwhelming factor is raw, native, deep-seated anti-Semitism. This is 2,000-year-old anti-Semitism. In the United States, it is very different. Anti-Semitism is not a major factor here. You know, of all the countries that the Jews have lived in 2,000 years, this is the most tolerant, friendly, loving country that the Jews have ever known. What I think is the most important factor here is sheer, raw ignorance. They have no idea what Hamas is, all that you said. They have no idea, for example, that there is no occupation in Gaza. You'll hear them talk about Gaza being occupied. The Israelis left in 2005. They tore out their settlements. There's not a settler. There's not a soldier. There is not a Jew left in Gaza. Do any of these people know it? No. Are they aware of the fact that Hamas's charter calls not just for the destruction of Israel, but for the killing of Jews everywhere in the world? This is an openly genocidal organization.
And how can you negotiate with them when they play by their own rules? Remember the ceasefire we just had last week, and everybody, the Israelis are going into the markets and they're stocking up on supplies, thinking the coast is clear because of the ceasefire, and then all of a sudden, boom, they're not playing by the rules. Our Sean Hannity is on the ground in Israel at this hour. He's been talking with residents there and seeing what plights they're dealing with. He's exploring an indoor playground / bomb shelter in Israel. Look at this.
In the last 10 years, just to give people some context and texture to what goes on in those border towns with Gaza, 10,000 rockets in 10 years. And I think that's the untold story of life in Israel for the average person. We do know that negotiations are going on in Egypt at this very hour to extend the ceasefire, possibly even longer than it's expected to go on.
Right here, the architect wanted to have a big merry-go-round, like the one you see in Disney World and big parks.
Right.
Because it's the nicest thing. But then, by the way, I think the merry-go-round was the very first thing the architect put on paper. But then the IDF came, and the IDF had to approve everything here. And they saw the plans, and they said, sorry, you cannot have a merry-go-round. And we said, why? This is the nicest thing for a kid with the lights and the horses and the music.
Because they can't get off.
They said, you're absolutely right. It's very nice. There's only one problem. It takes 25 seconds to stop a merry-go-round. They only have 15 seconds to run for cover.
That's sad.
End of story.
Oh, because when the air raid sirens go off, they only have 15 seconds, and that's why they have to build indoor playgrounds for the kids.
I mean, to imagine that a child's activity is limited by the time it takes to get to a bomb shelter, that's staggering. And we see that anti-Semitism is rising around the world. And so that's why it's surprising to hear President Carter, former President Carter, speaking out so forcefully on behalf of Hamas being recognized as a legitimate political actor.
Which he has supported in the past as well.
Incredible.
It is currently 7:11 here in New York City. And